not working for CAC, I do some teaching on the side with a group called the Guild for Spiritual Guidance. They are a super cool organization. I went through them as a participant, and now I'm one of the facilitators. And what they do is they equip spiritual guides by helping them go deeper into their own journey. And they use the psychology of Jung, a lot of the theology of Teilhard, and then just the worldwide mystical tradition. And I get to do that last part, which is super fun. So we have been using your latest book, which is just blowing everyone's mind lately. And so I just so appreciate getting the chance to chat with you a little bit and then share you with them.
Okay.
And I'd love to just ask you 3 or 4 spontaneous questions, and anything you say will be so deeply appreciated and wonderful.
Okay, that sounds great. And then we can end with the Shekinah prayer maybe, which is kind of a justice-oriented.
I was going to ask you to do that. I'm so glad.
And so maybe 30 minutes of talking?
That's great.
Yeah?
That's great.
Because it's just a little bonus, right? It's not part of the...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We'll see. I mean, maybe we'll talk longer, but...
It's whatever's good for you. This is a profound gift to me and to them. Because also, like, any chance I get to pick your brain and learn is amazing. So if you see me taking notes, don't mind.
Okay, I won't think you're doing online dating or something.
No, I'm not.
While we're talking.
Yeah, no, definitely not while we're talking. All right, so I have to start here. One of my favorite experiences that we shared together was when I was with you at Ghost Ranch, and you had a group of us there. We were in this writer's retreat, and you had invited everyone to bring an item to place on the altar that was precious to them. And I don't know if you remember this, but I brought this icon of Jesus, super special to me because I pilgrimaged to see the original in Sinai and spread my mom and brother's ashes there, which is a whole other story. But I remember coming up to you and I said, I have this icon. It's Jesus. I know Jesus is super triggery for some people. So I'm willing to keep it in my tent, or I can put it face down, or I can put it backwards. And you just looked at me and said, you can have your Jesus. And it was such a nice and beautiful life-giving moment. And it lends itself to the first thing I'd love your thoughts on. I love the fact that you teach interspirituality, and you're one of the only teachers I know that really grew up in it. You talk about this in the book, how you didn't have to deconstruct one primary tradition. And so you inspire me because I feel like you're this prototype of what spirituality is in the future, and also you're tapped into the ancient real essence of it. But for those of us who unpack, right? We grow up in one tradition, it's very exclusive, and then we unpack that and we reach out. A lot of times we take a lot of bad habits with us, right? And we have that old exclusivism, and I see this with a lot of folks that I work with, not at CAC, but like do interpersonal work with. Get to this place where people are saying, well, all religions are the same and all spirituality is the same. But the unconscious subtext is every religion believes what I believe, right? Yeah. So I know that's a lot of words, but I think the question I'm asking is, anything you could give on how we move towards interspirituality in a way that helps us get out of those bad habits, and we celebrate everything that's available without kind of colonizing it or creating a new weird fundamentalism out of it. Does that make sense?
Everything you're saying makes perfect sense, and it was a lot of things. Okay. So I'm going to try to take them one by one if I can remember, and I might need your help.
Sure.
First of all, interspirituality is becoming a new ism, and I'm backing off.
Okay.
For that very reason. Yeah. I'm not interested in a whole new structure that needs to be deconstructed. What I'm interested in is sitting in the unknowing, which is where the mystics of all spiritual traditions, as well as the great philosophers and the existentialists, for instance, invite us into into that space of radical unknowingness, and that's holy ground. And as soon as we think we know, we have all our shit together, theologically speaking, we're in trouble, and we've put God in a box, and we have killed God. So I really, I know I'm not the only one to have said that, but I'm really wary even of being called an interspiritual teacher at this point, although I often am. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I think those of us whose hearts kind of spontaneously, organically say yes to the presence of the sacred in all of these holy houses across the spiritual landscape, do so not because we think they're all the same. And like, oh, good, that's saying God is love, and that's saying God is love, and that's saying do unto others as you would have others do unto you, and so's this one, and so they're really all the same. I think what's beautiful about navigating an interspiritual path, and I'm using the word interspiritual because I haven't figured out a good alternative yet, is the diversity, the richness that we find in each of these spiritual traditions. And so it's not that that all is the same, that there's this homogeneous blob that we'll get to if we try hard enough. It's that they are all pointing to unity. So in the diversity, the resounding song of love is that we belong to each other, and we belong to this earth, to our mother, the earth. And so I think that's it, that it's that the spiritual traditions are all beautifully diverse and richly, interestingly different, and they're all at their mystical heart calling us into unity. So the last thing is about colonization and cultural appropriation, the other part of your question, and then you'll let me know if I left anything out. I think that's another reason I've been backing off a little bit from interspirituality as a thing, besides the fact that it seems the movement seems to be dominated by old white men, and I'm trying to get away from that. With all due respect to the many old white men that I love dearly, who have really supported me in my work in so many ways. I want to honor that. But that I think that I felt entitled, and I am white. I mean, I'm Jewish, so there is some marginalization going on there, but I walk into a convenience store and nobody's going to bother me or look at me twice. So, for instance, I mean, so I walk through this world with my whiteness, and that is a privilege that I am aware of. And so I think that for many years, so I'm in the midst of deconstructing this one, you guys. For many years, I think I helped myself to the spiritual resources of many of the world's great religious traditions that I was not born into. I was born into a non-religious Jewish family, in fact, an anti-religious Jewish family. But we also lived in Taos, New Mexico in the early 1970s, and it was a crossroads for many different religious and spiritual teachings and teachers, and still is. I still live here, and it's still that way. Lama Foundation is very nearby, where Ram Dass, my beloved teacher, created Be Here Now. So it was naturally a space for a child like me who had this attraction to spirituality to just revel in all of these different wisdom streams, and they all informed me. And as an adult, now an aging adult, I am aware of the fact that I operate with a degree of entitlement with regard to the spirituality of other traditions. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be like bees in the garden of the human spirit and draw nectar from all of those great wisdom stream flowers and turn them into honey, or allow them to be converted into that sweet and nourishing substance that they can be in our hearts. We should, and I agree with you, Mike, that this is the kind of evolutionary trajectory of the human family, is not to box ourselves into these individual spiritual traditions, but to harvest the beauty, not to get rid of all religions, which is a temptation, especially for millennials who are allergic to the institution, and I don't blame you one bit, but to rescue what is beautiful and true in all of them, and with honor, with respect, draw from our rich global heritage. Yeah, so that's a lot of stuff.
No, that's so good. And I so appreciate it. I keep giving away my physical copies of your latest book, so I'm limited to e-copy at this point, and then audiobook, which I know is a thing. So we'll, yeah. But I was revisiting again, and I want to stand up and cheer when you talk about. We won't get into it; it's too deep for this context. When you talk about non-duality. And some of the ways you break that down, I was getting my old Pentecostal amen. But I am resistant to this notion of the idea, right, that all religion, all wisdom traditions are going to go away, and we're going to become this nebulous puree of uniformity. So that image of the bee and the nectar is so good. And you've said to me in the past about, because this is a panic for me. I said, well, is religion as it is going away with all its art and culture? But you've always brought me back to this notion of the keepers of the jewels, which has been so helpful. Oh goodness, I want to ask you so many questions about that, but I feel like I want to sidebar for a moment based on your last few comments and ask you this. How, at this moment while we're having this conversation, is such a wild contemplative moment, because so many of us have been slowed down and pushed into this place we were talking about before I started recording of forced rest and also forced busyness. And yet, some of us also know that we're in this place because we have a certain degree of privilege that we can step back into. How would you give us counsel in holding that tension between appreciating the privilege and where it lets us go with contemplation and spirituality, but also recognizing that it is a privilege that not everyone has?
Yeah. So first of all, I would give you permission to not know what the hell is the right answer to this dilemma.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for all of us, yesterday I've been needing to say no to more and more things because I have so many requests coming at me all the time, and they all are very alluring because I love the people who are asking, or because they're dangling money at me and money's tight right now, or whatever. There are lots of reasons to say yes, but my soul is just crying out for me to say no thank you as lovingly and graciously as possible, because what I'm finding is that the spaciousness that I have the privilege to abide in right now by virtue of this pandemic that is causing such suffering to the human family and primarily to the human family, I know that there is something that I am working out inside my soul right now that is going to be needed later as we enter into this new landscape. So I want to suggest that that might be true for you, for all of you who are struggling with that. If you have the privilege of stillness in your life right now, yes, we're all busy, but if to the degree to which you can cultivate even more stillness and innerness, because it will pass. Who knows what it's going to look like, but this enforced time of sheltering in will eventually pass, and this opportunity will be gone. So while we have it, if you have the privilege of abiding in some degree of stillness, and you can really be discerning about what to say yes to, knowing and trusting that like a tree in winter, you're doing deep work in the roots of your soul, and you will be feeding the world from that reservoir that you're tending right now. This is what I believe. And then there will be a lot of things coming at you that will not only like financial temptations or whatever, or feeling like I'm a good girl or a good boy if I say yes, but other kinds of things. Like yesterday, a spiritual teacher in Europe called me and asked me if I would do a thing with her, and I said no. I said I've got to start being more discerning about what I say yes to, and she said, for me, it's the opposite. She said, right now, I feel like I have to say yes to everything because the world urgently needs the spiritual gifts that I have to offer. And I left that phone call feeling sort of chastened and like there's something wrong with me. And she's right. You know, we should, it's spiritual triage out there. We gotta, and we're the practitioners, and we need to tend the wounded. And then I realized she and I are in different places in our lives. She's younger than I am, and I am trusting the emptiness, I think, a little bit more than I ever did before. Trusting the emptiness that is plenitude. You know, in Buddhism, there's this word shunyata, right? And it's often translated as emptiness. It's the nature of all reality. It's undifferentiated. But Roshi Joan Halifax translates it as boundlessness. John of the Cross calls it nada, la nada, the nothing. But it's not nothing, it's everything. But it requires everything of us to show up in it.
Oh, goodness. I got to write that down. Oh, my goodness. That's so good. I appreciate that so much. And I also, I will say, it's such a wild moment in time. I find myself appreciating teachers like yourself so much, who I feel like there's things, I sit with some of your writings right now, and they mean something different in this moment than they even did a month ago. Yeah. And so I feel like you've been like tilling the soil for years, unbeknownst to any of us, perhaps even yourself, right, to then have this crop right now that the rest of us can come to for sustenance. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate that work is done. And you can be where you are, wherever you are, whatever you're in right now for the next thing. So it's I really cherish it. Yeah. And on that note, one of the things that I so appreciate about you as a teacher, and you know this, that the thing that I think, I was initially fascinated by your competence with Sufism, but then when I realized how deeply you write about death and loss and the transformation that comes in the midst of that, and you're one of the only people I know who does not romanticize it, but hits it head on and sees beauty in it. And that's not an easy, because, you know, if you overly romanticize it, it's not very comforting when you're in it. But to find the beauty is amazing. So all that to say, like, you know, your Caravan of No Despair has been just lifeblood for me in the last few months. And the last time I saw you, you gave me a copy of your translation of Julian's showings. So I intended this to be my Lectio for Lent. I did not know it would be my Lectio for the pandemic. But here we are. Yeah. And so thinking about this woman who survived plagues, had this profound and unbelievable illness that led to these showings, which she then unpacked, right? And I'm thinking even about, a friend keeps reminding me that the word apocalypse means unveiling. I can't help, this is my random question. I can't help but think about what Julian in particular might mean for this moment. And do you think that this crazy moment that we're going through globally is going to yield some kind of a showing? Is there wisdom there? I know that's a really meandering question, but.
It's been on my mind too. Julian of Norwich has been so much on my mind. In fact, I just gave the Dharma talks for the first ever online Ram Dass Legacy Retreat this past weekend, and it's online, available till May 1st. I'm not sure when you're going to be
Right
sharing
on.
our conversation, but if people want to see that for free, they can.
Right on.
And I mean, Julian of Norwich made her way into my Dharma talks because she's so relevant for this time. By the way, just quick aside, I was also thinking when you were talking about things that I wrote over the years that seem to be relevant now. So many of Ram Dass's teachings, because I've been listening to a lot of his archived recordings, are, I mean, it's almost to the letter perfect for now. Like there's one called In the Face of Chaos that he might as well be speaking right from the midst of the pandemic. So it's, you know, perennial wisdom is perennial wisdom, and it may seem very general, but it can be so specifically suited to a particular moment. Okay, I'm taking off my mic and I'm slipping behind the curtain. Pay no attention to the woman behind the curtain. I'm going to grab Julian.
Oh, great. Amazing.
Yeah, she's right here. And I'm right here
This
too.
is the good stuff, friends.
And I didn't knock over my screen. All right, so let me put my mic back on. So Julian, as Mike said, encapsulated so beautifully, experience, she in her lifetime, which was the 14th century, she went through 3 rounds, not she personally in her body, but 3 rounds of the plague, the Black Death in Europe, that actually obliterated, annihilated like 50% of the population, are some estimates, which means Julian, you know, statistically could have lost half the people she loved. In fact, my strong sense as a bereaved mother, I lost a child, is that Julian was grieving. And she became so ill. Like she just couldn't, you know, as so many bereaved parents feel like, I don't want to live in a world without my child in it. And I think she was dying of a broken heart. I mean, she had some physical illness, wasn't the plague, but something that was certainly a dire illness. But I think it was psychosomatic too. You know, definitely connected to her own emotional suffering. And so she was dying, lying in bed, dying, and her mother, this is the only relative we ever know. We don't know anything about her life. In fact, her name wasn't even Julian. That was the name of the church that her anchorage was attached to, the Church of St. Julian in Norwich, England. But anyway, she was lying in her bed, dying, had a near-death. Her mother calls the priest to come and administer last rites. He holds the crucifix over her head and says, you know, gaze into the face of your beloved and you will go straight into his arms as you take your last breaths. And that sounded like a good deal for someone for whom this world was nothing but pain, right? And so she gazed at the crucifix and everything around it dissolved and Christ came alive and revealed to her his passion, but not as a place of torment and lament exclusively, although of course that element was there, but also as an offering of, she uses words like friendliness and courtesy and hominess. And then he became her beloved companion as he revealed all of these things about life and about spiritual truth. And the main truths, in my mind, that he distilled for her were that sin isn't a thing. Sin is no thing, he says, has not a particle of substance, except for the consequences of certain actions that cause us and others suffering. Why would a loving God then punish us later for what we already have to endure in this life by virtue of taking these missteps, but also all the other suffering that comes in this life, like the Buddha taught us. Anyway, the other thing is that God has to be a woman. God has to be the feminine, the mother, because it is such a motherly act to break herself open and pour herself out for us. So I love that. So her famous saying, of course, that so many people are familiar with, probably all of you, is my version, my translation, all will be well, and all will be well, and every kind of thing shall be well. This is that has come to many of us through Julian over the years. And at the very end of the showing, so I translated this from Middle English, is what I did, into a contemporary English. So at the very end, very end of the book, she unpacks that phrase. So as Mike said, she has these showings in her near-death experience. She recovers. The minute she recovers, she writes it all down. Thank you, Julian, for doing that, because it's just treasure. And then becomes an anchoress and attaches herself in this small cell to the Church of St. Julian in she's probably in her early 30s at that point, and spends the rest of her life in the cell, but also with a window facing out onto the busy city streets of Norwich, giving spiritual direction to anyone who came by, or at least at certain hours, who knows. But she was engaged and also cloistered, like us right now. Yeah. She was in her cell, praying and loving God with all her mind and all her heart and all her soul and body. And she was offering herself to those in need with boundaries, I'm sure.
Wow, that's well said. Wow.
Right? And they were bringing her food too. People brought her treats, supposedly.
She was in there with her cat too, right?
And there was a cat, and
Right on.
there's evidence that she was raising bees. In fact, the cover that my publisher found for this book, it looks like loaves of bread in the window. It's not. It's beehives.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
I
Look at
know. I found
all
that
these
out.
ones. Wow, that's cool.
Bees in the garden of the human spirit. Okay,
Wow.
so let me quickly read this. So this is the second to last chapter, I think. Nope, it's the last chapter. It's
What
oh no,
page?
it's second last chapter, 85. I mean, it's showing 85, page 223. So
Got it.
there are 86 showings, and this is 85. I marveled at this vision. I mean, there aren't 86 showings. There are 16 showings. There are 86 chapters. I marveled at this vision, for in spite of our blindness here on earth and the foolish ways we live our lives, our endlessly gracious God still holds us in the highest regard and rejoices in all we do and are. We please him most wisely and truly, believing in his love and rejoicing with him and in him, just as we shall one day come to live in the endless bliss of God, praising him and thanking him with all our hearts. So he has loved us and known us in his boundless foresight since the before time began. He created us inside this love without beginning, and he protects us within that same love. He will never allow anything to impede our ultimate joy. And this is the part that's so extraordinary. I mean, that part was pretty great, but she says, and so, when the final judgment comes and we are all brought up to the heavenly realms, we shall clearly see in God all the secrets that are hidden from us now. Then, none of us will be moved in any way to say, Lord, if only things had been different, all would have been well. Instead, we shall all proclaim in one voice, Beloved one, may you be blessed because it is so. All is well. We see now that everything happened in accordance with your divine will, ordained before the beginning of time. Now that's very Christian language, right? And we can translate that in our own hearts in a way that is more directly relevant to the shape of each of our lives and of our own soul language. But the thing that at the heart of this message that Christ gave to Julian and Julian's giving to us is that it may not look like it right now, but it's not just like there's some heavenly space that we're going to get to where it will all be revealed. She's telling us right now, because Christ told her, guess what? It's not like it's all going to turn out fine in the end. It's that we will eventually, when our eyes open, when the eyes of the heart fully open, and we all have glimpses all the time. It's our birthright. When the eyes of the heart open, we see that all has been well all along. So how do we maintain that cosmic perspective where the architecture of the universe is perfect and beautiful, and stay, not use that as a spiritual bypass, but stay connected in a place of deep care. So we know the perfection, the beauty of it all, and the goodness of it all in our hearts. And here in this relative world, there is tremendous suffering. Those on the margins, those on the front lines. How do we stay in a place of deep care while keeping that, what Ram Dass called that witness, connected? I think contemplative practice helps a lot. Some kind of contemplative practice. You don't have to sit, with your ass on a cushion for half an hour a day every day, but some kind of intentional spaces of stillness where we learn about the nature of our own minds and we learn to not believe everything we think. That right there is a great skill.
Wow. That's amazing. This is so good. Goodness, my heart is bursting with this. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to share, I know we're coming towards the end of our time, but I'll share one super nerdy thing with you. And then, I've written a lot about the book of Job for whatever reason. That's my jam. And, so using super nerdy, theological language, I would always come back to this thing when I would read Job and some of the mystics, and Christian theologians get all wound up about theodicy, which for everybody watching is the question of, if God is good, why do bad things happen? And when I would read Job, and I've been thinking about this reading Julian, I would always come back to this idea that the only real answer to theodicy is theophany, which is that divinity shows up in suffering, and we should too. And there it is, right?
That's beautiful, Mike. That is so beautiful.
Thank you. I have been so astounded reading then your work about women mystics, because I'm like, this is something that has always been known and exemplified, and I see it in the lives and the teaching of all these women mystics, and yet there's always been, the religious system that then tries to to turn it into some logical formula, which it just doesn't do. So goodness, thank you. I couldn't ask for more, except to say anything you would share with us in the way that you think the wisdom of the women mystics show us how to be here now and how to move forward.
One of the, I think, hallmarks of the women mystics is that they're not interested in that kind of classic masculine paradigm of perfection, purification, and transcendence. That this world and the human predicament and the body are obstacles to be gotten over, or problems to be solved, or even worse, pathologies to be cured. But rather the sacred abides. This is panentheism, as Richard Rohr beautifully describes it, in all that is. And so the women mystics invite us to bless all ground as holy ground. It's very much what you're saying, that the sacred dwells and permeates and overflows every particle of being. And so rather than using, I think what the women mystics teach us of all spiritual traditions is that rather than using our spiritual technologies and methodologies as catapults to bounce us out of reality, we can, by fully showing up for what is, break open anything that keeps reality constrained and protects us against the intimate presence of the beloved. So we enter in through the portal of our relative human experience and discover that vastness that our hearts so deeply yearn for, even if we've repressed that longing.
I so appreciate that. That's so helpful and healing for me, because I still fall into that mind trap of I'm getting consumed with this, and I'm like, no, I have to get back to my practice or think about higher things. And that
Yeah.
taking me back around to real flesh and blood, lived reality as the ground of that is so goodness gracious. I thank you.
You're welcome. I know that we all just need to be reminded of that. I'm reminding myself too right now as I speak it.
Excellent. I so cherish you taking the time to do this.
Thank you, Michael. Do you want a prayer to end?
Yes, please, 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 please.
Okay, we had talked about that, so I'm very happy to share a little prayer to close. And thank you so much for the invitation to be with you and your people. And I hope everyone stays well inside and out, and that your loved ones also are well. And if they aren't, or if you aren't, that you are able to find somehow that access point to that deep wellspring of goodness that will help you get through this difficult time. And for those of you who are serving out in the world, thank you. So I will read the opening prayer from Wild Mercy to end. And this is a prayer to the Shekinah, who's the indwelling feminine presence in Judaism. And she is the spirit of the Sabbath, Shabbat. O Shekinah, yours is the feminine face of the holy, the luminous moon who lights up the night as we travel from captivity to liberation, the pillar of fire who guides our way home, the cloud hovering over the mountain peaks, living sign that the drought is over. You are the indwelling presence of the divine. Whenever we gather to praise the One, you are here in our midst. When we cry out for justice, you make our hearts tender. When we stand with those on the margins, you make our legs strong. When we create works of art and parent our children and harvest our gardens, you guide and sustain us. You are the Sabbath bride, the beloved, returned from exile. You restore balance in our relationships and wholeness to our fragmented souls. You infuse our lovemaking with honey. You fill the cup of our hearts, which tremble with longing, with the wine of your answering love. You are the song of our homecoming. You are the Sabbath queen, the great mother, who sits at the heart of the table, tearing off hunks of the secret bread that contains the exact flavor each of us loves best. You feed us all, the proud and the repentant, the believer and the skeptic, from your own hands. Your unconditional forgiveness dissolves otherness. O Shekinah, we are the vessel for your inflowing. Your radiance requires the clay of our embodiment. Your flame burns at the core of the earth. Your warmth penetrates the seedbed and animates the seedlings. You bless the head of every animal and kiss the tear-streaked face of humanity. You are the vision that builds community, and you are our refuge when the fabric of community unravels. Be with us now as we navigate the landscape of mystery, where your most cherished attributes, wild mercy and boundless compassion, righteousness and wisdom, seem to be cast aside and trampled by imperious world powers, and we are paralyzed by helplessness. Help us. May we remember you and lift you up. May we recognize your face and celebrate your beauty in everything and everyone, everywhere, always. Amen.